transformative experience for you pre-clubbing? What was the musical transformation?
Well, the Jackson 5. I don't know if people remember the Jackson 5. There used to be a Jackson 5 cartoon, which I kind of thought would be on YouTube, but I don't know if it is. But I remember, I don't know how old I was, but I remember thinking the Jackson 5 cartoon was just fantastic. But I think Blondie were probably the band that kind of knocked me over. Because in a way they had, because they had everything. I grew up in Birmingham and I was 16 years old and I went to see Blondie, which obviously for a 16-year-old lad to be this far away from Miss Debbie Harry, that was amazing enough. But it was just it was the fact that they had both excitement and you could jump around and it was kind of throwaway, but also there was art involved. And I think through the other thing was that what you said about music being important to me, but it isn't just music for me. And I can remember even at that age, 16, wanting to know more about Blondie. It wasn't for me just, 3 minutes of hanging on the telephone. It was, well, where's this come from? And who is she? And who are they? And how does it work? And actually, I look back and I think Blondie were probably the band that introduced me to television, Talking Heads, Patti Smith, New York, Factory, Andy Warhol, Velvet Underground. It's quite possible that that is how I discovered all that through that music. And I think in that particular era there was a lot of. I talked to Pete Wiley about this, and he said that as an artist, he was also aware in that era that you should have what he called a hinterland. So as well as you being an artist who made music, you also had, you also pointed out or opened doors or got involved with literature, film, etc., art. And so there were a whole lot of bands like that in that era. But I think probably seeing Blondie at Barbarella's was probably the moment.
And that is quite, from Blondie to Sonic Youth, that's happened in a very, very short period of time, didn't it? Probably four or 5 years.
Seemed like a long time to me, because the difference between being 16 and being 23 is a lot, or I thought it was then. Yeah, but there's a connection there, isn't there? Really.
Oh, there's always connections, yeah.
Kim Gordon, Debbie Harry, Madonna.
At what point did you decide to take this love of music into something more tangible in writing about it?
I think that was the fanzine, which, again, I think it was to do with that idea that it wasn't just music. And I mean, I wasn't like a massive fanzine aficionado. And again, there were a lot of fanzines around. In fact, James Brown's Attack on Bazag, I think that came a little bit after I'd started Debris, but obviously I was aware of that. John Robb's Rocks. There was Allied Propaganda, I can remember. I can remember a few, but I wasn't like a massive... But a fanzine for me was just a vehicle to express yourself. And I think that probably goes back a little bit to what I was saying before. I do think that if you're living in a really healthy society, people are wanting to express themselves. And if you want to create a healthy society, you give people those tools, or people take the tools, And the fanzine was a fantastic way of expressing yourself. And I was then 21. I'd graduated from Manchester University, and I had about probably 5 friends, I knew nobody in the media. The face and ID might as well have been in Chinese for all the... for all the sense they made to me. You know, Robert Elms talking about what to wear on your weekend in Barcelona meant nothing to me. So Debris was, so again with the fanzine, I kind of knew what I didn't want to be. I didn't want to be a style Bible. I didn't want it to have quite the same kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, of the fanzine thing that the Rocks and Attack on Bazag and Sniffing Glue were, which were all kind of scrawly, angry stuff. You know, I wanted Debris to be a little bit more considered, and I guess a little bit more a reflection of me, you know, because I'm not really a kind of a guy. But also I wanted to write about lots of other things. So in the fanzine, you know, I look back on some of the issues and I think I was, you know, probably a bit mental, but, you know, there would be an issue where I'd interview the woman who ran the laundrette on Great Western Street in Moss Side. I'd interview Raymond Carver, the short story writer from America. I'd write a 3-page article on the Left Book Club from the 1930s. And then I'd interview Steve Albini.
Yeah.
And
that's brilliantly bonkers.
Yeah, and it was just kind of what I was interested in. Yeah. And the thing with the fanzine, it sounds self-indulgent, but it was literally, again, it was like, well, no, I remember when Raymond Carver, the short story writer, first came over to England, I think there were only 4 people who interviewed him. You know, it was like me, the Times, a couple of other people. You know, so it was just that.
How did that happen? I mean, you know, you didn't know anybody in the...
God, I don't know. I mean, although I only knew about 5 people before I started the fanzine did give me a reason to knock on doors.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
And I look back and I mean, I would love to meet the 22-year-old me. I would carry a bag of cassettes and scraps of paper in a carrier bag around with me. I had a raincoat, had quite bushy hair. I was incredibly earnest, really earnest. Around the same time, I got chucked by a girl who said, "You're not just aloof, you're like a rock in the middle of the ocean," which is like, you know, the best way to get rid of anyone ever. Really nice thing to say. She came from Sunderland, actually. She follows me on Twitter. She does.
Has she asked you for a signed copy of the book yet?
And anyway, what was I saying? Yeah, so there was something about that 21, 22-year-old lad who at the same time would knock on a door. Brilliant. And I found out, for example, that Smith's manager, Joe Moss, had a clothing company called Crazy Face. And I discovered in the phone directory where they were based. And I knocked on the door of Crazy Face. And I asked if I could speak to Joe Moss. And I said, can I interview Morrissey? This is around the time of, before This Charming Man came out. Hand in Glove, that was the first single. Yeah, just around that time. And yeah, and he just said, yeah. And it kind of sounds like I'm either being quite mundane or very self-deprecating, but that's actually what happened. So there was a part of that earnest young man who somehow thought that it was okay to knock on doors, which it is, you know, and through that I kind of met, you know, eventually you meet people. You know, you look back afterwards, you kind of think you were probably a bit of a, you know, pain in the arse, or, you know, people probably thought, oh, fucking hell, is that fanzine editor again? But it was fantastic, you know, and I actually kept a diary around that time, and I was looking back at my diary for like 84, 85, and I had a brilliant life. I had no money, still didn't have a girlfriend, but I was going to films, I was going to see art, I was getting on National Express coaches and going to London, and it was fantastic. Yeah. And it was on like 35 quid a night, a week, dole money.
It's amazing how resourceful we were back then.
And also, I was kind of not, I think I was also, I didn't have any sense of ambition. You know, it wasn't like I wanted to be on the telly or, you know, I wanted to be famous. I certainly didn't want to be rich. I didn't want a big car. I still don't want a big car. I still don't even drive. I didn't want any of that. I just loved the fact that I could somehow access all this interesting stuff, basically.
And you kept doing it?
Yeah, I still do. Basically, I mean, by 85, I'd started DJing. So 30 years ago, the two things I was doing was writing about what I liked, playing records that I liked loudly to people, most of whom seemed quite appreciative of it, and trying to work out what the fuck is going on in the world. And 30 years later, I'm doing exactly the same.